Not too many weeks ago, we had a men's meeting at the Jones house. We've been going through ethics, and in the section on honesty, we actually talked about plagiarism there. Well, since that has happened, you probably don't follow this a whole lot.
Southern Baptist, was it? Yeah.
The Southern Baptists in the United States, there's a huge scandal unfolding. Now, they just had their yearly meeting, their main yearly convention, where they elect a new president every 2 years. Well, the new president, Ed Litton, I mean, if you've seen any of the YouTube videos, this guy basically took entire sermons and just blatantly preached somebody else's sermon. I mean, they go back and forth between J.D. Greer's sermons and Ed Litton's sermons. And I mean, this guy he copied it point by point, oftentimes phrase by phrase. And maybe I just sat there and watched too many of those. But what happened was I started thinking about myself. And I started thinking, am I guilty of this? And I felt like I wanted to say a few words publicly to you all. I've wrestled with where the line is in Christianity when somebody, I've even kind of wrestled with, is plagiarism as much as it may be something that if somebody copied an article, if you were, in a university and you cheated. But I've often wondered in the Christian context, even when I go back to the scriptures, for one, I don't find the idea of plagiarizing there. I actually find that, have you ever noticed kind of a resemblance between 2 Peter and Jude? Have you ever wondered who copied who? And I know. Do you know that when Luke put together his gospel, he blatantly, openly says to Theophilus, look, he's going to talk to all the people. And did he draw a lot from probably Mark? Perhaps. Here's the thing. I know this, that in this whole scandal over there, they were saying that thousands of pastors do this. Now, one of the things I've wanted in this church ever since I've been here is transparency. And I want to be transparent with you all. I look forward to studying. I don't want to simply jack somebody else's sermon and preach it to you as though it's my own, and not sit down and study the passage prayerfully and seek the Lord and look at language issues in the text and seek to cross-reference. I want you to know I do that work. But at the same time, I also want you to know this. I love to sit at other men's feet. When I prepare for a message, one of the things that I look forward to, I'm a reader, and I love to read. And do I bring, when I sit down and I read, and I'll tell you, through the Sermon on the Mount, I told the men when we met together for the men's meeting on ethics, I told them that I am primarily reading Martin Lloyd-Jones on the Sermon on the Mount, John Stott on the Sermon on the Mount, and D.A. Carson. And I've got some other books, but those are the three primary ones that I read. Do I bring some of their thoughts and some of their words into this pulpit? There's no question. I read them. I can't get away from that. I am going to take in places where these men impacted me. Now, you hear me mention their names sometimes. One of the things as a young believer that I was exposed to was Reformed preaching, where it seemed to me they quoted Puritans all the time. One of the things that I never wanted to do was I never wanted to stand in the pulpit and quote men as though the men are somehow what authenticates and gives authority to the message. I have purposely made it a point not to mention men that I read too much. Sometimes you'll get a quote, and I'll tell you Piper said it or Lloyd Jones said it. The reality is, I'm saying other things in the message that I was influenced by them. And I just want you to know, as I went back in my mind, I thought, you know what, I preached a sermon one time in Colorado on the parable of the net. Well, I had listened to Charles ahead of time. I was listening to Charles on the parables, and then I got to Denver and they wanted me to preach. And I was thinking, wow, I was really impacted by Charles' message on that. So I preached something similar. I preached 7 messages from the second and third chapters of Revelation, which I preached here. And I was listening to a brother out of Arkansas whose name is Don Johnson. Was I very influenced by him? Very influenced. I remember as a young believer, I listened to a John MacArthur message, and it powerfully impacted me. And later I realized it was basically R.C. Sproul's Holiness of God. I never would have faulted him. I felt like God powerfully used it. I read recently that John Wesley actually took other people's sermons, and one of the things he did in training his Methodist preachers was he wanted them to preach those other sermons. I've done that with young men. I've given them J.C. Ryle's expository thoughts, and I've asked them to preach those things very, very specifically. Now here's the thing. I'll say very publicly, have I always given other men the due credit for the places where I've been influenced? I can say no, I haven't. What I recognize is this. Tozer said this: if my fire is not large, it is yet real. And there may be those who can light their candle at its flame. Well, I have found this. I have found through the years that oftentimes men like Spurgeon, men like Lloyd Jones, men like John Piper, I have found my own flame lit by these guys. But after hearing about that scandal over there, I just told Ruby, I'm so freaked out by that thing that I told her, I'm going on a sabbatical from reading anybody else. And so, listen, I just want to say this to anybody and everybody. And I'm wanting this to go out to the whole world. That if anybody ever comes across anything in my messages that they feel like was unappropriately not attributed to somebody, feeling like this, I took a message from about 2 or 3 weeks back and I sent it to the elders in San Antonio, and I said, brothers, here's what Piper says in a paragraph. Here's what I said in a sermon that I preached to you. I said, guys, I have to be accountable. I said, I want you guys to be honest with me. And none of them said they thought it was plagiarism. One of them actually said, he was telling me a story about one time, I don't think he was aware, but he had to go preach at a prison, and I think it was popped on him. And he said he very quickly printed off a John MacArthur sermon, and he ran there. Now, is that something I would do? Yeah, I can't remember ever doing it, but would I do something like that if all of a sudden I was in a situation where I had to go preach at a prison and I didn't have anything prepared? Would I maybe go print off? I could see myself doing that. He told me it convicted him. Would that be wrong? I'm not even certain it would be wrong, brethren. Like I say, I don't know exactly where that line is. But I know this, I want to be transparent with you, and I want to be transparent. A lot of my sermons are out there on the internet, and I just want to be transparent with the whole world. That if anybody ever says, oh, that sermon right there, and that right there, you used 8 words that directly came out of Lloyd Jones in that book over there, I will say guilty as charged. And so, anyway, for the sake of transparency, I hope you'll hear that for what it's worth.